Here today with Rob Rudy, flown in from Montreal.
Pleasure to be here, Chris.
Although I hear he's been hanging out in Vancouver for the last few days.
I have. I've enjoyed 4 seasons in 1 week.
Snow, ice, frozen rain.
And a little bit of warmth. It's just, I used to everything in me.
I must have missed that.
A little bit. We had 1 day.
So Rob is here talking to my Tech Canada Emerging Leader Group today, specifically about strategy. Tell us a little bit about the high points of your presentation.
You know, I named it Starts With Strategy for a reason. Many companies would start off with, I have a great idea, I've got a new product or service. We love the entrepreneur who brings that enthusiasm. Once they sell it, and when they start a business, they're probably their own financial person, their own shipper, their own marketer. But once they sell it and they start to scale a little bit, then you've got to be more purposeful about what you want to do. Where do you want to sell? You know, to who are you trying to sell? All those things, they're so important because it's your time and money that you're putting behind all these great ideas. Those are strategic questions. I always believe it starts with strategy.
And how about for the emerging leaders? Because they're not really preparing their business to sell. That's not their business. So what's the relevance for them today?
So it's so important for an emerging leader because when they're brought into a business, they're brought in probably as subject matter experts. They could be in finance or manufacturing or IT, you name it. And typically they'll walk in saying, well, I'm so glad I'm here because they're going to tap into all that expertise. They find out very quickly though, when they have the word manager next to their name, they're probably now leading other people. They're probably expected to work across the company. Well, if we don't understand the strategy, everything we do is transactional. But we know for businesses to really gain footholds, to really get into the next marketplace and to make a difference, you've got to have everybody rowing in the same direction. You need your emerging leaders who are not just great at IT or operations or sales, but really great at actually leading their companies within their areas and across. Strategy answers those questions for people all the time.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing. Now, Rob, there's another thing we've just been talking about, which is very dear to my heart, which is around disruption.
Yes.
Having spent many years building businesses that were unique and different from the competition. So tell me a little bit about how disruption plays into strategic planning for emerging leaders.
Thank you for that. I think it's a great question. I know I've been, and probably you have too, Chris, in businesses where we were either the disruptor or the one being disrupted.
Absolutely.
It's a lot more fun to be the disruptor than it is the one being disrupted. I was disrupted in one business, and I remember thinking to myself, you know, are we reading the tea leaves wrong? Or are we just simply not wanting to accept that which might be happening? I believe it's always in the interest of every company, and really truthfully the emerging leaders, to start to take a look at what is happening in the landscape and say, you know what, I'd much rather, and it's painful, I'd much rather disrupt my own business than have a competitor knock on my door very, very harshly and say, by the way, you have less market share, you've got to drop your prices, and you've got to be able to change your service offering or else you won't have a place. I've been there. It is much more fun and much more, quite frankly, scalable to be much more in control. Now, it doesn't mean it's easy, but it's so critical. Mostly also because today, change is happening faster and deeper than ever before.
Absolutely. And tell me, is there a specific tactic that we can deploy in how, as an emerging leader, we can have the conversation around disruption in our organization? How do we bring that to the leader, the CEO, the owner, and what are some of the steps that we can do in going forward?
Absolutely, Chris. You know, I found, and especially with emerging leaders, start with your own department first. It's the one you have the most control over and the most knowledge of. If you start there, and they could look like small changes, but they're continual. We always say when we're making some change, let's get some early wins. Well, I want to be able to look at my own department as an emerging leader and say, I know this really well. I'm going to start to make these changes. I've got to be a bit of an advocate too. I've got to be able to communicate it, certainly to my boss and up above, giving me the confidence and really, quite frankly, the footprint to be able to say, you know what, I've got some other ideas. They may not be exactly in my area, but I certainly would be working across the company. I think I'd like to be able to share those. Always starting with your own, though, gives you the credibility and, frankly, probably the win you want to have.
You know, one of the things that is a real challenge, though, in a lot of organizations today is there's no money for this. There's no capital. There's no available cash. There's no available time. Everybody's so busy. Everybody's so, strapped by budgets. How do we get around that?
It's very real, what you just said. First, and I always ask groups when I speak to tech groups across Canada, how many people here feel like they have 20% time free? There's never a hand, no hands ever go up, right? We're typically the opposite. They're at 120%.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would say to people is, before you really want to go into that mindset, start to look at the old exercise of start, stop, and continue. What can you do to free up some of the time for non-value added activities? That might be the first important disruption that you can control yourself. Because let's face it, when you have more time to focus on that which adds more value for the company and the client, you are going to bring far more value to your company. But you've got to start with your own time. Then, and only then, can you probably have a better case to be made about, I've been able to create this room now to be able to build a better department in my own area. I may need a little bit more money. I'm not saying it's going to happen easily, but again, build a business case to the level of where your sphere of influence is. So I'm not suggesting you have to build the next greatest product and be able to show your board of directors, how it's going to change the world. Build your business case for your area, because quite frankly, people say, well, I don't have the budget, but people have budget when it comes to a quick and a viable solution that actually brings us more money.
Had a speaker last year, Tech brought in, Michael Brody-Waite, talked about his book, which is Leaders Are Like Drug Addicts, and his bigger takeaway from that was how to create an extra 500 hours a year by learning how to say no.
Yes.
So maybe there's a lot of things that we're doing in our organization at the moment that just aren't working, and we need to start saying no and figuring out a better way of doing it. And this doesn't cost anything. As a matter of fact, if we can create extra time, and time is money, in a way, it starts off with being more efficient. And like you said, what can we do in our own area?
Start with our own.
Our own microculture, our own silo, not that it's a silo necessarily, but our own team. What are the things that we can be doing? And can we get together with our fellow team members and start kicking around some ideas? So, well, thanks very much for sharing, Rob. It's great to see you again.
Pleasure, Chris.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you
and
for having
thanks
me.
for being here.
Pleasure.